Imagine waking up on a peaceful Saturday morning, only to find your driveway hijacked by the one neighbor who thrives on chaos. This wasn't just any neighbor, this was Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA who treated binders of rules like weapons. But when she deliberately parked her shiny SUV across my garage to block me in, I knew this was no accident. It was a challenge. What she didn't know was that her arrogance had just set the stage for one of the boldest acts of neighborhood revenge ever seen. An act so outrageous it would have her car dangling in the sky and crashing her reputation straight onto the mayor's lawn. It began like any other Saturday morning in the quiet, suburban neighborhood that I had chosen years ago for its promise of peace. The manicured lawns, tree-lined sidewalks, and almost identical houses spoke of stability, order, and comfort. On the surface, it was the perfect community. But beneath that polished exterior lay a simmering tension fueled by rules, petty disputes, and one particular resident who seemed to thrive on conflict. Her name was Karen, though that was not her given name. It was the nickname the neighborhood had collectively whispered, for she embodied every trait that the moniker had come to represent: entitlement, arrogance, and a compulsive need to control everything around her. She wasn't just any neighbor. She was also the self-appointed enforcer of the HOA, carrying binders of regulations like sacred texts and wielding them against anyone who dared step even a toe outside the lines. That morning, I opened my front door with coffee in hand, only to be met with a sight that made my blood boil. Parked directly across my driveway, blocking my garage completely, sat Karen's shiny SUV. Its metallic paint reflected the early sun as though it were mocking me. I stood in disbelief, watching steam rise from my cup as frustration rose within me. Karen's car was not just an inconvenience. It was a deliberate act of hostility. She knew exactly where she had left it. The driveway was not hers to obstruct, yet she had chosen to wedge her vehicle in front of my garage as if planting a flag in conquered territory. It wasn't the first time she had pushed boundaries, but this time it felt different. This time, it was not just about rules. It was about dominance. Memories of past confrontations flashed before me, letters taped to my door about the length of my grass, anonymous complaints about the color of my shutters, and even fines for leaving my trash cans visible for mere hours past collection day. Every note carried the same tone of smug superiority, and every fine had Karen's fingerprints all over it. Now, with her car sealing off my garage, she had crossed into new territory. At first, I considered the normal routes: calling the police, contacting the towing company, or filing yet another report with the HOA. But experience had taught me that none of these methods would work against her. The police would dismiss it as a civil dispute. The HOA board was stacked with her allies, people who either feared her or benefited from her relentless oversight. As for towing, well, the last time I tried, she had somehow managed to rally the neighborhood into believing I was the aggressor. This time, I knew I needed to do something different, something bold, something that would not only resolve the immediate problem, but also send a message so clear that Karen would think twice before targeting me again. I paced the length of my driveway, sipping the last of my coffee as I weighed my options. Each step brought me closer to a realization. Karen thrived on power, on the belief that she was untouchable. If I wanted to put an end to this, I needed to strike at that very sense of invincibility. I needed to do something that would embarrass her, something she could not spin to her advantage. That was when the idea struck me, something she could not spin to her advantage. That was when the idea struck me, idea so outrageous that at first I dismissed it as impossible. But the more I thought about it, the more it began to feel not only possible but necessary. Why not remove the car entirely? Not by towing it a few blocks away, not by pushing it out of the way, but by lifting it literally and placing it somewhere that would make a statement. Somewhere visible, undeniable, and humiliating. The mayor's lawn. The thought filled me with an odd mixture of dread and excitement. It was audacious, risky, and perhaps even reckless. But it was also poetic justice. Karen was notorious for her connections to local officials, often boasting of her influence and her ability to bend rules in her favor. What better way to highlight her arrogance than to deposit her prized vehicle right in front of the very authority she claimed as her shield? As I stood staring at the blocked garage, the seed of a plan took root. I began researching, sketching, and considering logistics. Helicopters capable of lifting vehicles were not unheard of. They were often used in construction or for recovering wrecks from difficult terrain. With the right call and the right price, it could be arranged. Over the next few days, I quietly made preparations. I spoke with contacts, asked careful questions, and pieced together a network of possibilities. The more I learned, the more feasible the plan became. I would need timing, coordination, and a certain measure of discretion. But it could be done. Meanwhile, Karen continued her antics as if daring me to retaliate. Her SUV remained a fixture in front of my garage for longer stretches, and when I confronted her indirectly through complaints, she only escalated. Flyers about community standards appeared in mailboxes, thinly veiled attacks that painted me as the neighborhood's troublemaker. Yet through it all, I stayed quiet, focused, and patient, because I knew something she did not. Her arrogance had written a check that her car was about to cash in the most spectacular way possible. By the end of the week, the plan was in place. All that remained was execution. And as I looked once more at her SUV blocking my garage, I felt a calm resolve settle over me. This was no longer about inconvenience. This was about reclaiming control, about sending a message that Karen's reign of intimidation was over. I would not just move her car. I would redefine the entire battle. And so, the stage was set for an act that would transform a petty neighborhood dispute into a spectacle the entire town would remember. The decision to airlift Karen's car was not one made lightly. It was born out of frustration, but it quickly evolved into something far more calculated. What started as a wild idea soon became a carefully structured plan, every detail mapped out with precision. If I were going to do something this bold, there could be no mistakes. The move had to be flawless, or the consequences could come crashing down on me faster than the car itself. The first step was research. I needed to understand what it would take to physically move a vehicle using a helicopter. Late nights were spent combing through articles, watching grainy videos of construction lifts, and even joining obscure forums where aviation enthusiasts discussed the logistics of lifting heavy loads. I discovered that airlifting cars was not uncommon in certain industries, but it required specific equipment, strong harnesses, secure lifting points, and pilots who were experienced in precision drops. As I learned, I also began calculating the weight of Karen's SUV. It was not the lightest of vehicles, but it fell within the lifting capacity of several medium-sized helicopters. The key would be finding a company willing to take the job without asking too many questions. For that, I had to reach into the network of contacts I had built over the years: contractors, specialists, and problem solvers who operated quietly in the shadows of legitimate work. After a week of careful inquiries, I found a pilot who fit the profile. He was known for his discretion and his willingness to take on unconventional assignments, provided the price was right. I arranged a meeting away from the neighborhood in a quiet industrial lot where no familiar eyes could spot me. The pilot listened to my outline of the plan, raised an eyebrow at its audacity, but agreed that it could be done. The only condition was payment in full, upfront, and absolute secrecy. Securing the helicopter was one piece of the puzzle, but I also needed a safe staging ground. I couldn't exactly have the helicopter swoop in and hover over my neighborhood without preparation. That kind of activity would draw attention before the job was complete. So, I identified an open field a few miles away, a secluded area where the helicopter could wait until the moment was right. From there, it would take only minutes to reach my house, grab the vehicle, and make the drop. The drop itself required special consideration. The mayor's lawn wasn't just a random patch of grass, it was a symbol of authority, meticulously maintained and always in the public eye. Delivering Karen's car there would send shockwaves, but it also demanded surgical precision. Too far to one side, and the car might land on the street, diluting the impact. Too close to the house, and I risked damaging property, which would turn the story from poetic justice to criminal destruction. I instructed the pilot to aim for the center of the sprawling front yard, where the mayor often hosted community gatherings. The symbolism would be impossible to ignore. With logistics set, the next challenge was timing. Karen's car needed to be in position, blocking my garage for the plan to work. That required patience, because although she was arrogant, she was not entirely predictable. Some days her SUV would linger for hours in front of my driveway. Other times, she would park elsewhere, leaving me to wonder if she had grown suspicious. I monitored her habits closely, keeping track of when she seemed most likely to block me. Patterns began to emerge. She favored weekday mornings, when she knew I was preparing to leave for work or weekends. When I had projects in the garage. It was almost as if she fed off my frustration, timing her actions to maximize the disruption. Little did she know, her predictability was now her greatest weakness. I marked my calendar, circling the days when her behavior suggested the highest likelihood of a blockade. The helicopter would be on standby during those windows, ready to swoop in as soon as her SUV appeared. While the technical side of the plan came together, I also prepared myself for the inevitable fallout. This stunt was not something I could walk away from without scrutiny. Neighbors would talk. The HOA would panic. And Karen, stripped of her pride, would lash out in every way imaginable. I needed to be ready for the backlash, but I also knew that the spectacle would shift public opinion in my favor. For too long, she had ruled the neighborhood with intimidation and false authority. By making her the subject of public ridicule, I would expose her for what she truly was, a bully who had finally met her match. As the days passed, the tension built inside me like a coiled spring. Every time I saw Karen's SUV parked smugly in front of my garage, I felt the weight of what I was about to do. The temptation to act immediately was overwhelming, but I forced myself to wait for the perfect moment. The key to success was patience. If I moved too soon, I risked alerting her. If I waited too long, the opportunity might slip away. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the neighborhood in hues of orange and gold, I stood at the end of my driveway, staring at the spot where her SUV so often sat. I imagined the roar of helicopter blades cutting through the air, the sight of her car rising slowly, dangling helplessly as it was carried away like a toy. I imagined the collective gasp of the neighborhood, the flurry of camera phones capturing the moment, and the stunned silence that would follow when the car touched down on the mayor's pristine lawn. The thought filled me with a sense of control I hadn't felt in years. For so long, Karen had dictated the terms of our neighborhood life, but soon the balance of power would shift. Soon, I would take back what she had stolen: peace, respect, and dignity. Finally, the day arrived when all the pieces aligned. Karen's SUV once again sat defiantly in front of my garage, blocking me in as though daring me to act. The sun was high, the skies were clear, and the pilot was already in the staging field, waiting for my signal. My heart pounded as I stood in the shadows of my home, phone in hand, ready to set everything in motion. I knew there would be no turning back after this. Once the helicopter descended, once Karen's SUV was lifted into the sky, the neighborhood would never be the same. But that was the point. I wasn't looking for the same. I was looking for change, and change was exactly what was about to happen. The morning unfolded like a storm waiting to break. The air carried a tension that was invisible yet heavy, as if the neighborhood itself sensed something extraordinary was about to occur. I had been up since dawn, pacing the length of my home, rehearsing every step of the plan in my mind. By the time Karen's SUV appeared across my driveway, its shadow falling defiantly across my garage door, I was already ready. The call had been placed, the signal given, and the wheels of the plan had begun to turn. The sky was clear, painted in bright shades of blue, the kind of day where any unusual event would be visible to everyone for miles around. That worked in my favor. I didn't want secrecy. I wanted spectacle. This was not just about moving Karen's car. This was about stripping her of the aura she carried in the neighborhood, an aura of untouchable superiority. Her SUV, polished to a near-mirror shine, sat smugly in front of my garage as though she had personally placed it there to provoke me. At first, the neighborhood was quiet, as most of the residents went about their usual routines. Sprinklers sprayed lazy arcs of water across lawns, dogs barked in fenced yards, and distant lawnmowers droned like background static. But beneath that normality, something else was coming. Then, faintly at first, came the sound I had been waiting for, the rhythmic thump of helicopter blades cutting through the morning air. It was subtle at first, almost blending with the hum of the neighborhood, but it grew louder with each passing second. Birds scattered from trees, barking dogs turned their heads upward, and neighbors began stepping onto porches, squinting toward the sky. The sound was not something they were accustomed to, not in this carefully controlled community where even minor disruptions were frowned upon. Heads tilted, conversations paused, and the first murmurs of confusion rippled across the street. Then it appeared. The helicopter crested the treetops, its rotors chopping the air with authority. It hovered briefly in the distance before moving with purpose toward my block. The sight was surreal, almost cinematic. The sun caught the metal of its body, turning it into a glinting presence that commanded attention. People pointed, cameras were raised, and within moments, the once quiet neighborhood had transformed into a crowd of spectators. Karen was not among them, at least not yet. She had retreated into her house after leaving her SUV in its usual obstructionist position, likely satisfied with her latest act of defiance. She had no idea what was about to happen, no clue that the very vehicle she used as a weapon was seconds away from being disarmed in the most humiliating way possible. Helicopter descended lower, steady and precise, its downdraft sending leaves and loose papers spiraling through the air. Grass rippled as if caught in an invisible storm, and the neighbors shielded their eyes from the gusts. With practiced skill, the pilot maneuvered into position directly above Karen's SUV. From the aircraft, thick cables were lowered, swaying in the turbulence. Onlookers gasped, their confusion morphing into dawning realization that this was no accident. This was intentional. The harness snapped into place, latching onto the SUV with mechanical certainty. The moment was electric, the kind of sight that burned itself into memory. Karen's SUV, once immovable and arrogant in its placement, began to rise from the ground. Slowly, at first, the tires lifted off the pavement, leaving behind the faint impression of tread marks on the asphalt. Gasps turned into shouts and phones captured every second. The vehicle dangled precariously for a moment, then steadied as the helicopter adjusted. The sheer absurdity of it all seemed to paralyze the neighborhood. There it was, Karen's gleaming SUV, suspended in midair, hovering above the street like a trophy of defiance. Children laughed, adults exchanged stunned glances, and whispers spread like wildfire. No one dared intervene. No one knew how to stop what was happening. Inside her home, the commotion finally drew Karen out. Her front door swung open, and she emerged onto her porch, her face contorted with disbelief. She shouted something lost in the roar of the helicopter, her arms flailing in futile protest. She ran down her steps and into the yard, pointing wildly at the sky as though her outrage could summon the SUV back to the ground. But it was too late. The vehicle was already ascending, leaving her behind as it rose higher and higher, tethered securely by the helicopter's cables. Karen's fury was matched only by her helplessness. For once, the power she wielded so casually had been stripped away. She could not write a complaint letter to stop the lift. She could not summon the HOA board to intervene. All she could do was watch as her prized possession floated away, a spectacle for the entire neighborhood to witness. The helicopter turned slowly, carrying the SUV like an offering. Its path was deliberate, angled toward the heart of town. The crowd followed the trajectory with their eyes, murmurs swelling into a chorus of disbelief. Some neighbors covered their mouths in shock, while others openly smirked, unable to suppress the satisfaction of seeing Karen finally humbled. Karen, meanwhile, chased after the scene in desperation, running a few frantic steps down the street before realizing the futility of her actions. She collapsed onto the curb, her fists clenched, her shouts drowned by the receding thunder of the helicopter. Her SUV was gone, lifted into the sky like a trophy, and every neighbor had seen it. The spectacle left a silence in its wake, the kind of silence that follows an earthquake. People lingered in their yards, whispering theories, piecing together the story they had just witnessed. Phones buzzed as recordings were shared instantly across social media, spreading the event beyond the confines of the neighborhood. The legend of what had just happened was already growing, the story mutating with each retelling. Back at my house, I watched from the shadows, unseen but fully aware of the impact. My heart pounded, but not with fear, with exhilaration. The hardest part was done. The SUV was airborne, carried toward its destination, toward the mayor's immaculate lawn where it would land like a declaration of war against arrogance and unchecked power. Karen had always believed herself untouchable, shielded by her alliances and her endless stream of complaints. But now, stripped of her SUV, she was exposed. And the neighborhood, for the first time, saw her not as an authority figure but as a victim of her own arrogance. As the helicopter disappeared, the crowd slowly dispersed, but the buzz remained. The story was no longer just mine. It belonged to the entire community. And soon, when the SUV landed on the mayor's lawn, it would belong to the entire town. The lift had been a success, but the true fallout was only beginning. The flight across town was brief, but to those who watched from the ground, it felt like a parade of humiliation carried through the skies. The helicopter cut a direct line above neighborhoods, schools and businesses, dangling Karen's SUV like some bizarre prize. Its glossy paint reflected the sunlight, flashing like a beacon against the clear morning sky. Crowds formed in parks and on sidewalks, pointing upward in disbelief. Phones captured every angle, broadcasting the scene live across social media, ensuring that the moment could never be hidden or denied. The mayor's house sat near the center of town, an elegant brick colonial with a sweeping front lawn that was a source of civic pride. The grass was always trimmed with military precision, flower beds framed the walkway in perfect symmetry, and the flagpole at the edge of the property gleamed with polished brass. For years, it had been the backdrop of speeches, parades, and community events. Now it was about to become the stage for a spectacle no one would ever forget. The helicopter approached with deliberate precision. The pilot steadied the craft, lowering its altitude until the downdraft whipped the mayor's hedges into chaos. The sound was deafening, rattling windows and drawing neighbors from their porches in stunned disbelief. From above, the SUV swayed slightly, its tires spinning lazily in the air as if mocking the laws of gravity. On the ground, pedestrians froze, shielding their faces from the wind as the aircraft positioned itself directly over the heart of the lawn. The once pristine grass flattened in concentric circles beneath the storm of rotor wash. Then, slowly, carefully, the helicopter lowered the SUV. It descended like a spectacle in slow motion, dangling closer to the earth until the wheels touched down with a solid thud. The car, still perfectly intact, now sat in the center of the mayor's immaculate lawn like a misplaced monument. The pilot disengaged the cables, leaving the SUV stranded, then pulled the helicopter upward in a graceful arc, disappearing into the blue horizon as though nothing unusual had occurred. For a long moment, silence reigned. The scene was so surreal that no one seemed to know how to react. The mayor's lawn, once a symbol of authority and order, now held the very embodiment of defiance. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every angle of the gleaming SUV parked defiantly in the grass. Within minutes, the image went viral. Karen's car on the mayor's lawn plastered across timelines, news alerts, and gossip threads. Back in the neighborhood, word spread like wildfire. Those who had witnessed the lift firsthand were now recounting the story to those who hadn't, embellishing details, adding color, turning the event into legend even as it unfolded. The HOA's phone lines were overwhelmed with calls, some demanding answers, others reveling in the spectacle. Neighbors gathered in small groups, shaking their heads in disbelief, whispering about what this meant for Karen, for the HOA, and for the future of their meticulously ordered community. Karen herself was unraveling. When she realized the helicopter had not simply removed her SUV, but had carried it across town, she scrambled into action. Her face twisted in rage, she dialed frantically, shouting into the phone, demanding someone intervene. But her cries went unheard. By the time she arrived at the mayor's property, panting and disheveled, the damage was done. The car sat in plain sight, a monument to her downfall, surrounded by onlookers recording every second of her humiliation. The mayor, caught off guard by the sudden appearance of the vehicle, emerged from his home to find his lawn transformed into the centerpiece of a scandal. His expression shifted from confusion to irritation to outright disbelief as he processed what had happened. The presence of cameras ensured that his every reaction would be analyzed and replayed across the community, fueling the drama further. Reporters, drawn by the rapid spread of the story online, arrived within hours. News vans lined the streets, microphones were thrust into faces, and the story that had begun as a petty neighborhood feud exploded into a town-wide sensation. SUV airlifted onto mayor's lawn became the headline splashed across evening broadcasts. The footage was replayed on loops, commentators speculated about motives, and the community found itself divided between those who cheered the audacity of the stunt and those who clutched their pearls in outrage. Meanwhile, Karen's carefully crafted image of authority was unraveling. For years, she had cultivated a persona of power, wielding her influence over the HOA and her neighbors with smug satisfaction. Now that persona was in shambles. Instead of commanding respect, she had become the punchline of jokes. Her SUV turned into a symbol of everything wrong with her arrogance. The mayor, faced with a spectacle unfolding on his own property, demanded answers. His office scrambled to issue statements, insisting that the act was under investigation. But even as officials spoke, the reality was clear. No one could undo what had already happened. The SUV remained stranded in the grass until a tow truck finally arrived to haul it away. By then, the damage to reputations had already spread far beyond the boundaries of the town. Back at home, I watched the fallout unfold with quiet satisfaction. I hadn't needed to say a word. The images spoke louder than anything I could have written in a complaint or shouted at an HOA meeting. The stunt had stripped Karen of her untouchable image in a single stroke, and no amount of spin could repair it, but I also knew the story was not over. Karen was not the type to accept humiliation quietly. Her pride had been wounded in front of the entire community, and she would stop at nothing to retaliate. Already, I could imagine her scheming, plotting her next move, reaching out to her network of allies in the HOA to regain control. The real battle had only just begun. And as the sun set on that chaotic day, the neighborhood buzzed with speculation about what would come next. Would the HOA punish me? Would Karen rally her supporters? Or would the community finally see through her facade and turn against her for good? The car had been dropped, but the consequences were still falling, rippling outward with every new headline, every shared video, every whispered conversation. What had started as a blocked garage had transformed into a spectacle that shook the entire town, and there was no going back. The chaos from the mayor's lawn had barely settled before Karen launched her counterattack. Humiliation had never been a part of her carefully curated identity, and now it burned in her like fuel. She had been reduced to a laughingstock, her SUV dangling across social media feeds. Her image replayed endlessly as she screamed helplessly beneath the helicopter's path. It was a blow she could not ignore, and everyone who knew her understood one thing. Karen was about to strike back. The first signs came quietly. Flyers began appearing in mailboxes anonymous at first, though the tone was unmistakably hers. They were filled with warnings about safety violations, reckless neighbors, and the dangers of vigilantism undermining community order. They didn't name me directly, but everyone knew who the target was. The language was sharp, dripping with the same arrogance she had wielded in HOA meetings for years. She painted herself as the victim of a malicious attack, twisting the narrative into something that fit her endless quest for control. The HOA board, stacked with her loyal allies, responded swiftly. An emergency meeting was convened, and notices were distributed accusing me of endangering public safety and creating a nuisance. Fines were proposed. Threats of legal action were floated, and whispers circulated that my very place in the neighborhood was at risk. For the first time, the HOA's authority felt less like rules and more like a weapon pointed directly at me. But Karen had underestimated the shifting tides of public opinion. The neighborhood, once silent under her reign, had tasted the satisfaction of seeing her undone. Many residents had laughed, quietly or openly, when her SUV landed on the mayor's perfect grass. For them, it wasn't just about one stunt. It was about years of pent-up frustration finally finding release. They had endured her complaints, her surveillance, her petty fines. And now, watching her scramble to repair her reputation, they felt emboldened. Lines were drawn. On one side stood Karen and her loyalists, clinging to the rules of the HOA as though they were shields. On the other side were the neighbors who had grown weary of her tyranny, now emboldened by her public humiliation. The community, once bound together by uniform lawns and rigid codes, fractured into factions. Conversations at mailboxes grew tense. Sidewalk encounters ended with sharp glares. What had begun as a feud between two people had become a neighborhood-wide war of allegiance. Karen, sensing her control slipping, doubled down. She filed official complaints against me, not just with the HOA but with city officials. She claimed that my actions had endangered lives, disrupted the peace, and caused property values to plummet. She even framed herself as a community hero, arguing that her strict enforcement of rules was the only thing preventing chaos from consuming the neighborhood. Her SUV, she insisted, had been targeted not because of her arrogance, but because of her bravery in defending the standards of the community. The mayor's office, still reeling from the bizarre spectacle on his lawn, offered little comfort. Embarrassed and unwilling to admit their own lack of control, city officials launched vague investigations into neighborhood disturbances. The media swarmed, eager to milk every angle of the unfolding drama. Headlines painted Karen alternately as a victim and a villain, while my own role remained shrouded in mystery. Few knew I had orchestrated the airlift, and I intended to keep it that way. But Karen suspected. She had no proof, no photographs tying me to the helicopter, but her instincts told her I was behind it. And so, her campaign of retaliation grew personal. She began monitoring my property more aggressively, snapping photos of my trash cans, measuring the length of my grass with a ruler, and noting the placement of my holiday decorations. Every minor infraction was filed with the HOA, and every notice came stamped with her invisible signature of spite. It would have been suffocating if not for the shift in the neighborhood's atmosphere. Many residents who once cowered under her surveillance now stood quietly in solidarity with me. Some stopped by with sympathetic glances, others left messages of support, and a few even offered to testify against her at the next HOA meeting. Karen had always thrived on isolation, singling out individuals and breaking them down. Now, she was the one being isolated, her grip on the community slipping through her fingers like sand. Still, I knew she wouldn't go down easily. The humiliation of the SUV on the mayor's lawn had wounded her pride in a way that no letter or fine could ever heal. She wanted more than control, she wanted revenge. And as the days stretched on, her desperation became increasingly reckless. She filed a police report accusing me of harassment, though she couldn't prove her claims. She threatened lawsuits, though her bluster rarely translated into actual legal action. Yet behind her noise, I could see the cracks forming. The HOA, too, began to fracture. Some board members, once loyal to her, grew uneasy under the weight of community backlash. They had supported Karen because she seemed powerful, but power built on intimidation is fragile. When laughter replaced fear, her authority weakened. A few began questioning whether her leadership was worth the chaos she had unleashed. It was a battle of endurance now, her relentless campaign of retaliation against my quiet, patient resolve. I avoided confrontation, knowing that every angry outburst she made only further exposed her instability. And yet, beneath it all, I sensed the storm was building. Karen wasn't done. She was gathering everything she had left for one final attempt to restore her dominance. The neighborhood was no longer simply a row of manicured lawns and pastel-painted houses. It had become a stage, each driveway and front porch a piece of the battleground. And everyone, whether they wanted to or not, had been drawn into the spectacle. I knew the climax was coming. The question wasn't if Karen would strike again, it was when, and how far she would be willing to go. The days following Karen's retaliation campaign felt heavy, as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Tension was everywhere woven into the silence of driveways, hidden in the nervous glances exchanged at mailboxes, carried in the whispers that drifted through backyards. Everyone knew something was coming, and everyone knew Karen would not allow her pride to be buried beneath laughter and humiliation without one final attempt to reclaim control. The HOA meeting was announced with unusual urgency. Notices appeared on every doorstep, printed in bold letters and underlined twice. Mandatory attendance for all residents. It was clear this would not be an ordinary session about lawn heights or fence colors. This was the battlefield Karen had chosen for her last stand. The rumors spread quickly. Karen was preparing to unveil her evidence, to lay out her accusations, and to demand that the HOA strip me of any credibility and, if possible, force me out of the neighborhood entirely. When the evening arrived, the small community hall overflowed with people. Neighbors who rarely attended gathered eagerly, their faces marked by curiosity, anticipation, and a trace of dread. Some carried folded arms and hardened expressions, prepared to defend Karen at all costs. Others leaned forward with quiet eagerness, sensing that the spectacle might finally bring an end to years of unchecked power. The air hummed with nervous energy. The kind that builds before a storm breaks. Karen arrived dressed not in defeat but in defiance. Her bright blazer shone like armor, her hair meticulously styled, her binder of documents clutched tightly against her chest. She walked with the rigid determination of someone who had convinced herself she could not lose. Every step she took was measured, as though she were rehearsing for the role of her life. For Karen, this was no longer about rules or even about her car, it was about restoring her throne, proving to herself and to everyone else that she still reigned over the community. Meeting began with the usual formalities, but no one seemed to care about them. Everyone waited for the inevitable. Karen was given the floor, and she seized it with a kind of ferocity only humiliation can breed. Her binder snapped open, pages fanned across the table, and photographs slid into view. She presented complaints, letters, and half-baked accusations, weaving them into a story where she was the victim of reckless neighbors, where her SUV's misadventure was an act of terrorism against order, and where the community faced imminent collapse unless she, and only she, was restored to unquestioned authority. Her words poured out with force, but something strange hung in the air. Where once her voice commanded silence, now it echoed hollowly. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Some whispered to each other. Others rolled their eyes. The spell she had held over the community for so long seemed to have weakened. Instead of fear, there was impatience. Instead of obedience, there was doubt. Then came her greatest mistake. In her desperation, Karen overreached. She accused not just me, but the entire community of cowardice and disloyalty. She painted every laugh, every whisper, every failure to defend her as an act of betrayal. Her rage slipped through the cracks of her polished speech, spilling into insults and bitterness. She had meant to rally support, but instead she revealed the raw, unfiltered anger that had always driven her. It was in that moment that the tide turned. A neighbor, quiet, unassuming, one of the very people Karen had fined in the past for trivial reasons, stood and reminded the room of the years of bullying, the countless letters, the petty fines. Others joined in, their voices steady, recounting their own experiences. Each story was like a stone laid on a scale, and together they outweighed Karen's fury. For the first time, her binder of rules seemed powerless. The board members, sensing the shift, hesitated. They looked at Karen, then at the crowd, and then at each other. Their loyalty had always been to control, not to Karen herself, and now they could see that control was slipping through her grasp. The president of the HOA, once her staunchest ally, carefully suggested that perhaps the community needed a vote. Karen protested furiously, but the motion was made, and hands went up across the room. The majority had spoken. Karen was to be removed from her position on the board. The moment was electric. Neighbors who had once shrank under her glares now sat taller, relief etched across their faces. Karen, stunned, clutched her binder as though it were a lifeline, her eyes darting across the room for any trace of support. But support had evaporated. The laughter that had haunted her since the day her SUV landed on the mayor's lawn had evolved into something stronger: unity. Her reign was over. She stormed out of the hall, the sound of her heels striking the tile echoing like the last notes of a performance gone wrong. No one followed. No one offered comfort. For the first time, Karen was truly alone. In the days that followed, the neighborhood began to heal. The flyers stopped. The complaints ceased. The constant tension lifted, replaced by something lighter. Neighbors who had once avoided each other's eyes now stopped to chat at mailboxes. Children played freely without fear of being scolded for leaving their toys in the yard. The air felt different, as though the community itself had exhaled a long, weary breath. As for Karen, she retreated behind her closed blinds. Her bright blazers were seen less often. Her once frequent patrols vanished. The SUV, though retrieved from the mayor's lawn, became a symbol she could never escape. Its image lived on in the minds of everyone who had witnessed it, a permanent reminder of the day her control unraveled. For me, the storm had passed. I had not needed to expose my role in the helicopter stunt. The spectacle had spoken for itself. My silence became my shield, and Karen's downfall came from her own arrogance. In the end, it wasn't the airlift that destroyed her. It was her inability to let go of the control she thought she deserved. The neighborhood moved forward, scarred but stronger. The HOA, stripped of Karen's tyranny, began to function as it was meant to, guiding rather than ruling. Rules remained, but they were softened by fairness and common sense. For the first time in years, the community felt like a neighborhood again, not a dictatorship, and though I never admitted my part in the dramatic relocation of Karen's SUV, I sometimes caught knowing smiles from neighbors who suspected. They never asked, and I never told. Some secrets are best left unspoken, their power lingering in the quiet understanding of those who witnessed history unfold. Karen's name still drifted through conversations, but never with fear again. Only with amusement, as though she were now nothing more than a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when power is abused and pride blinds reason. So the saga closed, not with the roar of helicopter blades or the slam of car doors, but with silence. The silence of peace returning, of laughter filling the void where fear once lived, and of a community finally free.